Hello, everybody, and good evening. Welcome to There Is No Ocean Bee, What We Must Do to Restore Our Blue Planet. I'm Tamsin Rose, and I have the great pleasure to be your moderator this evening. This is the flagship event of the EU Ocean Week, a series of 7 days of debates, exchanges, and inspiration. We are broadcasting live from the Beaux-Arts in central Brussels. There are several hundred people who've registered to be here with us tonight, and many more of you who are watching all around the globe. And we want you to be part of the conversation. And there are 2 ways you can engage with us. If you're on Twitter, please be part of the conversation by using the hashtag EU Ocean Week. For those of you who are watching us on the live stream, if you click on the bottom of your screen where you see the YouTube icon, you should see the live chat come up on the side, and that's where you have a chance to ask questions and share your views. And we really hope that you have a fantastic time with us today as we explore what we need to do and how we make a difference. But first, I would like to introduce Martin Harper of BirdLife International on behalf of the 6 NGOs who are organizing EU Ocean Week. Welcome to Martin.
Good evening. We are in a nature and climate emergency. We know that we need nothing short of a transformation of the world's economies this decade if we are to avoid catastrophic climate change and avoid 1 million species going extinct on our beautiful planet. The good news is that there is a growing acceptance of the need that we need to act, but the bad news is there is a huge gap between those words which we hear from politicians and action. And that is definitely the case when it comes to the marine environment. For too long, marine issues have felt like the Cinderella of environmental debates. It's out of sight, out of mind. And it's absolutely why the 6 NGOs decided to start Ocean Week in 2020, because we need to talk about oceans, because they're amazing. Tonight you'll hear one of the relatives from the famous marine biologist Jacques Cousteau, and he once said that the sea, once it casts its spell, holds its net of wonder forever. And for me, there is nothing more thrilling than being at sea when gannets and terns are dive bombing all around me, because our marine environment is just full of fabulous creatures, home to something like 1 million known species. And of course, our marine environment helps us as humans as well. Something like 3 billion people around the world depend on marine and coastal habitats for their livelihoods. And of course, the marine ecosystem underpins our planetary system, our life support system. By absorbing or storing carbon, it helps regulate our climate. But our marine environment is in real trouble. All the statistics that you're going to hear this evening suggest that we have an enormous amount to do to look after and nurture and recover the wonder of our seas. We know, for example, that the EU missed its target of ensuring that all seas were in good environmental status by 2020. And we know that more than 1/3 of seabirds continue to decline, and we know that many marine mammals, for example in the Mediterranean, have seen their populations collapse by 40%. And the pressures, they're growing. 11 million tons of plastics enters the marine environment every year, and there is a growing competition for development at sea, and we need to find space for wildlife to coexist alongside humans. And it's why the NGOs who convened this event tonight have also produced the Blue Manifesto, outlining what we think needs to be done to restore our seas. And tonight we're going to be inviting you to sign our Ocean Pledge, and you can do so online by tweeting your support. And there's 4 big themes that we're encouraging you to think about to ensure that we shift away from harmful subsidies to support environmentally sustainable fisheries, that we see 30% of our marine environment properly protected, backed up by good management, and that we do restore 15% of coastal habitats, and we turn off the tap of plastic pollution. But the good news is that we have a great ally in the ocean itself, because given a chance, it can heal, it can recover. Which is why all the NGOs here and many others across the whole of Europe are campaigning so hard to see the publication of the proposed EU Nature Restoration Law, which we dearly hope is going to be published on June the 22nd. That is just next week. Because if we allow our seas to heal, that's going to help us in the fight against climate change, it's going to help us adapt to deal with the consequences of climate, and at the same time, it's going to allow us to ensure that our next generation enjoys the wonders of the marine environment. So enjoy the evening, sign the pledge, and go out and spread the word that there is no Ocean B. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you for that, Martin. And I'm just going to invite you to take a second and just close your eyes and imagine the sea. Martin described the wonder of seeing birds flying at sea, but everyone has a very personal experience of the sea. The smell of the sea, the sound of the sea, the taste of the sea, and whether the seas that you are most familiar with are cold and bracing or warm and soft. As human beings, we all have a direct and personal relationship with our seas. And Martin reminded us of that. And we should look at the way that we need to make progress on healing our seas through that sense of wonder, of the extraordinary biodiversity and miracle that is the life in our seas. So next, I'd like to introduce Adam Weiss from Client Earth. He's going to take us through what was in the Blue Manifesto in 2020 and explore progress or not in those key areas in the last 2 years. Adam.
Good evening. It is very cool and even a bit strange to be here on stage in this place, where a lot of us in Brussels come to listen to beautiful music. It's strange because I love music, but I am certainly no musician. I'm here tonight to talk to you about law and policy and their relationship to science. In particular, I'm here to talk to you about the Blue Manifesto. This is a policy document that our NGOs published in 2020 as a roadmap for the decade for our ocean. I should tell you to read or reread the Blue Manifesto, and you definitely should. I hope you picked up your copy in the lobby. But for some of you, that would be a bit like a musician standing up here on stage and telling you that you should read her sheet music. When you look at this document, you'll see words like chemical strategy for sustainability, emissions reduction pathway, or extended producer responsibility. Now, these are terms that get me very excited, but I know that that's not the case for everyone. But like sheet music for a symphony, the Blue Manifesto is a set of instructions, in this case for the European Union, to create something breathtakingly beautiful. Our ocean in 2030, teeming with life. Europe, surrounded by water that we are confident bathing in. Seas that are part of a secure, abundant, and safe food system. An ocean that can continue to help regulate a climate that by 2030 we will have started to get under control. And I know that this set of instructions is beautiful because I know the people who wrote it. The most passionate, the most committed, and the cleverest ocean policy people in Europe. The cleverest and kindest people always work in NGOs, I should say. They are my colleagues, and they are great. But as you might guess, I am not here to tell you that everything is great. Because actually, the Blue Manifesto is a lot like sheet music in another sense as well. It only works if you hit all the notes. If you'll bear with me for a moment, I promise I'm not going to take you through the entire document, but I want to give you a few examples from our assessment of where things are at with the Blue Manifesto 2 years in. We published it, like I said, in 2020, so we are a fifth of the way to 2030. And in the 2 years in between, we have had a pandemic, and now we have a war just across our border. But we've also reached a point where the ocean cannot wait. On some points, things have gone well at EU level. You may have noticed that you're not seeing any plastic straws anymore, or any plastic forks and knives, I hope. You may have stopped getting takeaway coffee in disposable cups because you noticed a marking on those cups with a dead turtle on it. The Single-Use Plastics Directive has set a new global standard. The Port Reception Facilities Directive is something you are less likely to feel in your everyday life, but it's designed to ensure that the waste generated on ships is returned to land and adequately dealt with. But these two pieces of legislation need to be transposed and implemented by member states. Part of the problem is that we do not know how the member states are doing. That's the case with waste from ships. And in some cases, you will still be seeing plastic cutlery and straws in some places in Europe because member states have implemented the legislation wrongly. My third example is even a bit worse: the Fisheries Control Regulation. Overfishing is the greatest threat to life in our ocean. Fisheries controls, the enforcement of EU laws on overfishing and illegal fishing, are the key to making sure life in our ocean survives. Yet as part of the revision of this key EU legislation, gaping holes in enforcement are being written into the law. For example, a proposal to say that serious infringements are not, in fact, serious, or making it acceptable to grossly underestimate catches, which makes it impossible to manage fisheries properly. And let's talk about bycatch, or untargeted catch, of sensitive species during fishing. The deaths of dolphins in the Bay of Biscay or of the Baltic harbor porpoise are universally distressing. The European Commission has started legal proceedings against certain member states for failing to act. And there are some proposed measures, but all this is insufficient. In this part of the music, there is barely more than silence. And it's painful. If you read our assessment of progress on the Blue Manifesto, I hope you picked up that in the lobby as well, on the first few pages, pages 3 and 4 to be exact, you will see a mix of colors for various milestones. A few are green, but more are yellow or red. And some are gray, because we don't even have the data to assess how progress is going. It should all be green. You don't need me to tell you the consequences of these failures. Just look at the title of this evening's event. It's my privilege now to get to spend a few minutes talking to Patrick Child, who is the Deputy Director General at DG Environment. I know, Patrick, that you are not the European Commission as a whole. You're one of our friends at DG Environment. And the European Commission is not the European Union as a whole, so I'm not here to grill you about failures to reach the Blue Manifesto goals. But I've got a few questions to you, so maybe we can go ahead and sit down. So, Patrick, my first question for you. Some things go right. In our assessment, the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability and the Zero Pollution Action Plan light up in green. They are fantastic initiatives that have the promise to make big changes for the ocean if they are delivered. What went right, to the extent that you know, so that we can try to see that kind of ambition across everything that's covered in the Blue Manifesto?
Thanks very much, Adam. And it's really great to be here this evening. And I want to congratulate you and the colleagues on the Blue Manifesto and the progress that you've made in raising visibility and discussion around these vitally important topics. I mean, on your question, you mentioned the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability and our Zero Pollution Action Plan, which are key building blocks of the European Green Deal. And I guess, my first answer to, why is this a success story is because the European Green Deal even against the background of the crises that we've seen, the pandemic and now the Russian invasion in the Ukraine, these issues resonate extremely strongly with citizens across the European Union and beyond. And I think we can be rightly proud not only of making in Europe significant strides on the delivery of the European Green Deal in the framework of these strategies, but also exercising a degree of global leadership, which is so vitally necessary if we're to save the planet as a whole. And I think that looking then into the specifics of the two strategies, what is important is that in both cases we build in a strong dimension of public engagement. And I particularly highlight the Zero Pollution Action Plan stakeholder platform, which meets regularly, bringing together a wide range of interlocutors, including, I'm happy to say, a very strong presence of civil society. And similarly, we have a high-level roundtable, which is following our work on chemicals. So, working with all the stakeholders and trying to forge a sort of consensus path with a high level of ambition, which can help us make progress. But I think the other thing that's important with this sort of strategy is that we're talking about a sort of framework of political aspiration. And we need to follow that up with legislation. And legislative proposals which meet the objectives that we've set out. So specifically on zero pollution, I mean, we're looking at the moment at a whole range of different legislative proposals, including in particular in the marine environment and in our water management strategies, to see what specific measures we can implement in order to deliver on some of the objectives, like the reduction of nutrient losses in the sea by 50%, reduction of plastics by 50%, microplastics by 30%. And we need then, when we prepare legislation, again to do it in a collective way in discussion with all the relevant stakeholders. And I think that those are some of the ways that we want to make progress, giving in particular visibility to the specific success stories that we can see, which show that what we're proposing is not only necessary but also feasible. And I think that that's a key consideration.
Thanks for that, Patrick. I've got another question for you. I mentioned when I was talking a few minutes ago about some of the areas where things look difficult politically. For example, the trilogue negotiations with the fisheries control regulation, where it seems like politics is getting in the way of what should be good rules, or transposition by member states of the Single-Use Plastics Directive or other directives. It looks to us like politics is sometimes making it impossible to get through the changes that the ocean needs. How do you think that civil society and the Commission can work together to ensure that the Blue Manifesto gets realized?
Well, Adam, look, thanks for the question. And I mean, we all know that we are living in an overall political system. And so it's always necessary to strike a balance between our natural level of ambition and what is socio-economically feasible and realistic. And where I think that the European Commission and civil society NGO representatives work particularly effectively together, often with very strong links also in the European Parliament and in some of our member states, is by putting on the table a high level of ambition, even if we don't get everything that we want first time round. That's when we're framing the legislation. You then raise important questions about, well, once the legislation is adopted, how can we make sure that it is effectively implemented and, where necessary, transposed into national legislation? And there, I mean, in our role as Commission, Guardian of the Treaty, we do have enforcement and infringement procedures and powers which allow us in ultimate cases to take member states to court, even to have regular fines against member states if they're not implementing the laws correctly. And there, again, civil society has a really important role in providing us with the evidence that we need and the examples and the specifics of the non-respect of legislation. Because that's then what we need in order to back up our cases. And we've seen, I mean, environmental legislation at European level is quite a sort of challenging enterprise, that it does take a long time, and not all member states will deliver on the commitments that they've made when they adopt the legislation as quickly as any of they would like. And so I think it is, we need to keep working together and keep the pressure. And you do a really good job in holding our feet to the fire. And your Blue Manifesto, I believe, strikes the right sort of balance in terms of level of ambition, clarity and specificity of the objectives, but of course also relevance to what we want to achieve.
Thanks for that, and I've taken note of the call to be evidence gatherers. I think it's at the core of what we're meant to do as NGOs. Patrick, I mentioned just a few things from the Blue Manifesto, so I wonder if there's anything else that you wanted to address about work that the Commission is doing and how the Blue Manifesto fits into your work plan.
No, well, thanks. I mean, we talked a little bit about the Zero Pollution Action Plan, and of course that's one very important dimension of what we are trying to do, particularly on the sort of pollution side, improving nutrient levels, reducing plastics, microplastics in the marine environment, and we will continue with that. I mean, the other very important dimension of what we're doing is on biodiversity. And with our Biodiversity Strategy 2030, we have set, really sort of clear commitments in terms of our intentions for protection of marine areas, 30%, and of restoring coastal and marine environments. I mean, some of the things that are very much highlighted in your Blue Manifesto. And so, I can certainly assure you that the direction of travel resonates very strongly with what we're trying to achieve. In terms of our immediate sort of intentions on the biodiversity strategy, firstly, the nature restoration law. I mean, we are indeed intending to come forward with that with the Commission adoption before the summer break. I'm not completely certain it'll be next week, but certainly, we want to be in a strong position, again, not only in terms of delivery on the strategy, but in terms of global leadership before the COP15, whenever that takes place sometime later this year. And linked to that, and more specifically on the marine environment, we are working with our colleagues in DG Mare, the fisheries DG, on an action plan on the sustainability of fishing, which addresses in particular, or will address in particular, some of the issues we heard about earlier on bycatches of sensitive species, and also on phasing out damaging bottom trawling in marine protected areas. But and a sort of overall vision of how we can advance on those two vitally important objectives, drawing on scientific advice, taking account of the socio-economic dynamics in the sector, with the shared goal of having a healthy, sustainable, and successful sort of fisheries sector in the long term.
Thanks so much, Patrick. I don't want to take up too much more time because I think we need to leave it to the panelists, but I truly hope that we'll all be back here next year and looking at a slightly greener version of our assessment of the Blue Manifesto, and it's great to know that we've got friends and allies like you in the Commission who care deeply about these issues.
Well, thank you very much, Adam, and good luck for the rest of the event. Okay.
Thank you, Adam. That was really interesting to hear the exchange and the level of ambition and where we still need to make progress. I'm now delighted that I'm going to invite on the stage with me 4 members to join a panel. And we'll have a first conversation ourselves, and then I'm going to invite you, the audience, to be part of the conversation. So remember, if you're on Twitter, please use the hashtag EUOceanWeek. And those of you who are watching us on live stream, on YouTube, you can put in the chat. And I will also open the floor here to the people who are participating with us in this room. And we have 2 microphones that will be able to be brought to you. So I will come over to sit here, and I will invite my panel to come and join me. So please, Hans Brunix, please come and join me. Barbara Rodenberg-Jetzmer, please come and join me. Grace O'Sullivan and Jessica Antonise. Thank you. So we just heard about the importance of evidence. And Hans, I'm turning to you as the voice of science and the voice of evidence. Now, the European Environment Agency put out a report earlier this year where you set out some 4 different imaginaries, future scenarios to see where we could be. And let me ask you, what would those different imaginaries mean for the way that we view the oceans and the way that we use them?
Okay, well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to be here. It's great to be part of this event on an absolutely critical topic for the future of humanity, I would say. We always say the future of the planet, but it's more the future of humanity. And yes, indeed, we made those imaginaries with scientists and with our member countries, because we cannot predict the future, but if you can't imagine it, you can't shape it. And I think we're at a stage where we urgently need to shape the future of this planet in a way that is rather and fundamentally different from what we've been doing the last 5 decades. And these imaginaries are a variety of ways to reach sustainability, fundamental sustainability. And what ties them all together is that we are looking at fundamental shifts in our systems of production and consumption, because whatever the state of the ocean is ultimately linked to the core systems that drive the economy, but also supposedly should drive long-term societal well-being. And that's the food system, where of course oceans play a critical role. It's the whole energy system, where we know that oceans are increasingly regarded as places not only for drilling of fossil fuels, which of course we should stop as soon as we can, but also for renewable energy, with a number of interactions with biodiversity, also for the mobility system, where the ocean is the conveyor belt of globalization, and also the built environment, because we're looking for resources that are potentially running out on land, and we're now going to harvest them in the ocean. And we need to fundamentally change this, and fundamentally means that we really need to go to other ways of producing and consuming. And these imaginaries tap into that. And this is not new. 2 weeks ago, we were in Stockholm for Stockholm Plus 50. You know, Article 7 of a 50-year-old document talks about fundamentally protecting our seas. And Article 3 actually talks about restoring ecosystems. If we don't look back, you think that this nature restoration is the invention of the wheel. Well, it's a wheel that is 50 years old. So it's about time that we take all the scientific messaging, all the monitoring, all the data which we have on the ocean seriously, and that we start to adapt what we call ecosystem-based management of whatever human activity we have on the sea.
Thank you. I mean, you've described that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and in fact, this is a 50-year-old wheel, but that wheel's remarkably squeaky, and it's got more than a few broken spokes, so we clearly need to put some attention into that. But I'm wondering, you know, you look at the evidence and the trends, and in the EA, you have the advantage of being able to have these data sets. You can look backwards and forwards. Based on the trends that you see, what actions do we need to take, and take now, in order to move towards this restoration?
Well, I think that they have been referred to by the previous speakers. I think, first of all, the food system. That is obvious. The food system that is based on fishing, that is unsustainable. The food system that is based on land and overuse of pesticides and nutrients that end up in the sea. So that is an absolutely essential part. The other part is, of course, climate change. I mean, climate change increasingly is having an enormous impact on the oceans, on their resilience, on the role they can play as a climate regulator, which is absolutely essential. I mean, this is really, really, really essential. And then when we look at all the activities on the ocean, yeah, we need to, not gradually, but very quickly now. We live in a pivotal decade that the scientists say to become fundamentally sustainable, we really need to speed up the change that is necessary in that sector as well. And Maersk, the biggest shipping company, Danish, is now talking about climate neutral shipping. Well, that should become the standard rather sooner than later. And I know this is difficult, and I know it's not easy, and it's going to cost money and all of that. But guess what? Not doing it is going to make our life much more difficult, much more expensive, and in fact unlivable on this planet.
So we really have to grasp the nettle and be prepared to make the changes and invest now so that we don't have to pay a much bigger price over the long term. And that's a challenging messaging, particularly for policymakers who have a short mandate and are thinking on a much shorter term. But this really, as you said, it's a pivotal decade. Let me bring in Barbara. I saw you smile when Hans said, fundamentally we need to change our food system, and you were definitely nodding there. And you have the voice from the ground, from the fishing community. Can you give us a vision of Europe transforming fishing into a low-impact activity? What does that mean, and is it possible?
It is possible, and we must. So, in my opinion, we must harvest food from the seas as well as from land, just because all our food, of course, is the result of photosynthesis, and 2/3 of the planet's surface is water. So really not using water as a source of food is only putting more stress on terrestrial ecosystems, and we should really not let that happen. So we must harvest food from the sea, and then of course it's like how. And low impact, I find it hard to define what that really is. I think a low input fishery, like having less input of fossil fuel per kilogram of good food for people, that is what we should aim for. And if we look at that worldwide, at least 1/3, it used to be 40% about, but I'm not sure what it is nowadays, of fish caught is not meant for human consumption, but is meant for cattle and for not even only for fish farming, but also for terrestrial farming. Then I think, we should really, first of all, fish for human consumption, because the European food production, a lot of it is actually not food production, but it's converting plant into animal at a huge loss of quantity and also of quality. It's not even bringing the quality up. So we use fossil fuels, we use resources to actually, in the end, have a negative net result in amounts of food. The European food producers, in the end, produce more hunger than food. That is weird, and fishery is part of that. So we should really stop that immediately and just start fishing for human consumption, and then at the lowest possible input of fossil fuels. And I think it's doable. We need clever ways of fishing, and really it depends on the ecosystem, it depends on the waters, what type of boats, what type of techniques you need. So we need a full toolbox. We cannot just afford to leave out some things because we think they do too much damage. If you have a toolbox with a screwdriver and a hammer and some other things, and you say, oh, let's just not have the hammer because it causes too much damage. Well, at a certain moment, maybe you need the hammer. We really, I think we should leave it up to coastal communities, to fishermen for themselves, to find the right way and give them the right tools and a good framework. And if we have a lot of discussions that are actually much against one another, instead of having a good, meaningful conversation of where we want to go to together. And that, in the end, costs more energy and does more harm than it brings us any further. So that's one of the first things that we need to stop.
Grace, can you tell us some stories? Sorry, Barbara. From fishing communities, the culture amongst fishing communities across Europe is a proud part of our heritage, and yet if you look at the way we fish today, we're clearly very far from the feelings and cultures of the fishing community. Do they feel like they're involved in this? How do we give more space to the fishing community who want to provide quality fish for human consumption, but not necessarily be caught up in this industrialization of the way we approach food from our seas?
The difficulty in that is that the Greens are always against fishermen. So so we somehow grew into this stupid setup that makes it almost impossible to cooperate. Whereas, I mean, we harvest food from the sea. For our livelihoods, we depend on the sea and on nature. And I really liked what, I forgot his name, was saying, like the sea is such a marvelous place and it can restore itself all the time, again and again. The sea is changing all the time. We see the changes. We also see certain species moving more up north and other species from the south coming into our waters. We notice the water is getting warmer. We also see, because I fish in very shallow waters, in the sea, in the Wadden Sea, it's an inhabited site, but it's anyhow beautiful, but 2/3 of our sea falls dry at low tide. And it's very important for shellfish, and it's very important for migratory birds who feed on shellfish and also who feed on the worms and all the life that's in and on the seabed. But when it's low tide on a hot summer day, everything can be dead in one day. And it happens, it has happened, the whole cockle stock of the Wadden Sea has died 2 summers in a row, and of course, happily, then the next winter there's a lot of new young stock. So there now are cockles to harvest for food and also for the birds. But if this summer again, at some day, it will be very, very hot, and it will be low tide in the middle of the day, again, all these cockle beds will be dead, and we have to wait for the next year to have cockles again. And so I really think that apart from all the other things that we want to do with fisheries, getting the fuel consumption down is the most important. It is something that fishermen really know that is important because we feel it and we see it happening. We also see how the sea is changing all the time and restoring itself. There's always life in the sea, there's always food in the sea. The sea will never be empty. The sea will always be able to feed us because there will always be sunlight, there will always be nutrients, there will always be photosynthesis, there will always be life in the sea. And if it's only crab and jellyfish, we only need good cooks. That's my opinion on that. But yeah, I mean, that's also for us as fishermen really the big question. How can we become allies again instead of opponents? Because we are not or should not be. And there's another thing behind that, and that is that we seemingly have the same interest, and that is a healthy sea full of life, full of food for wildlife and people. But there's on the background another discussion going on that is not spoken about openly, but it's under the surface, and that's about who owns the sea. Who has the right to go to certain places and harvest? And so I sometimes think that actually that this ocean grabbing is behind some of the fights between fishermen and so-called green organizations that I sometimes have the feeling that they have another interest, and then that they just, you know, saying that they do this in the interest of the climate and nature and everything, but in fact it's a big colonist game that's going on, and that's depriving coastal communities from what is in fact a common, our common good.
Thank you, Barbara. Your passion for the sea shines through very brightly, and it's inspiring to hear. Let me invite Grace to come in to bring in a political perspective. If I can just zoom out from the sort of coastal community and the challenge on a daily basis, and just look at our big picture. The world's population is still growing, and there are record numbers of people going hungry around the world. And each of our speakers so far has touched on the importance of rethinking our food system. But we also have got climate change coming, which is going to impact on the sea, and we've got conflict and environmental degradation. So how do we fit in that complex mix of problems? How do we fit a sustainable fisheries approach? And particularly the concern, largely a result of the war in Ukraine, of the importance of food security. That's moved right up the political agenda. And there's a bit of a concern that that's become the overwhelming driver of our approach to fisheries, rather than some of the balance and community approach that we've heard earlier. So from a political perspective, how do you balance all that out?
I suppose first, thank you very much for being here and having the opportunity. It's really, I just want to echo some of what Barbara and Hans said. You know, the oceans are and should be for the common good. And you alluded to the climate crisis, but what you didn't mention was the biodiversity decline, you know, and the sharp number of species that I would have grown up with in Ireland, or like Barbara was talking about the migration of species, you know, and just seeing how stocks are moving, how birds, in terms of migration, how they're changing their range. And it's all going back to the evidence that people like Hans produce for us to show us like what is happening with climate change. So for me, the first absolutely most urgent thing we have to do is recognize that in order to stop the accelerating of climate change, so stop the big wave of climate change, we must introduce the fossil fuel, we must ban fossil fuel subsidies. So that's something that we can do in the European Union, and it's something we're aiming towards. Because if we keep driving the global warming, as Barbara was saying, like as all the fisheries see, the temperatures are increasing. I mean, in my lifetime growing up on the coast in Tramore, County Waterford, Ireland, and as a surfer, I mean, we are seeing, you know, we're experiencing in our skin, if I can say, I mean, you can feel that the temperatures are warming. So the temperatures as a sea swimmer that I would have grown up with as in my teens have clearly changed. So the first is to introduce the measures that will stop the planet warming, and then we have to look at the resource and the resources that are provided by the oceans, the seas, and rivers, and that comes to our food. And I mean, for me as a member of the PECH committee, one of the first things I said when I went into the European Parliament as a first-time MEP was we shouldn't call this committee the PECH Fisheries Committee, we should call it the Oceans Committee, because we should be working first and foremost for healthy oceans and thereby protecting the food resource in the ocean. And then there's so many challenges to the food resource. So we have the challenge of pollution. and pollution coming from the land into the oceans, and then we have the pollution in the sea. So we're seeing the microplastics, the litter, and all of these are impacting on that very precious resource, that highly nutritious food source that we have from the ocean. So we have so many challenges that we have to work to try to curb, and we no longer, this is the decade of the ocean, and we no longer have time. As you were saying, Barbara, I think Hans, you mentioned it too. I mean, I myself joined Greenpeace at the age of 20, just going on 21 back in the 80s. And already then we were saying, you know, we have to speed up. Now we have the crisis in biodiversity. We have the climate crisis. So in terms of food production, if we don't create a healthy ocean, then for me, we're at nothing. And we have to do our best to ensure that not only are we working towards reducing global warming, but we're also we're working with the fishers. Because in the end, you're the ones who bring the food to the table. So if we're not working together to provide that resource, and if we're not working towards a fair and a just transition, and again, that's in the legislation, it's in the climate law, and if we don't move beyond this growth paradigm or this model towards a well-being economy, recognizing the importance of people and the planet before profit, and we move away from the industrial mechanisms that are hoovering up the oceans, that are fishing methods, that we're going to have to look at them. I mean, look, I'm from a coastal community. I know the fishermen in my neighborhood. My brother was a fisherman. You know, we have to look at sustainable ways of fishing, so the type of fishing gear that we're using that is good in the environment, that it's efficient and it catches, but it doesn't destroy. And we're going to have to look at marine protected areas in order to allow stocks to recover, and then we're going to have to look at restoration. So that nature restoration law, we need that to come on stream as soon as possible. So food, obviously, we all need food. We're part, I want to go back to what Hans said, and I'll finish on this, part of the global ecosystem. So for me, I'm an earthling, I come from planet Earth. That jars for me, I don't like that. Because for me, I'm from planet Ocean. And I don't want, harm to happen to this planet we live on. But I definitely think the Green Deal is good. There's very good parts in the Green Deal, there's good strategies, but we have to make sure that the blue comes through the green, and that we see in every policy area we're working on. And we really, I'm really delighted with this, because this really helps us policymakers. But we have to bring the blue, constantly thinking of bringing the blue, the ocean, the seas, the rivers, bringing the water, the hydrology into every aspect of policy making in order to have healthy food.
Thank you. And before I invite you to pass the mic, let me just ask you to reflect on the environment you work in the European Parliament, because the Green Deal was a sort of big highlight when we had all this commitment to renewal and to change and to carbon neutrality and the transition. But then you also at the same time got this quite materialistic approach to the blue economy and how we can look at the oceans as a resource to be used. And several of our speakers have said, and I think it was Hans who said, if we try to harvest the oceans the way we harvest raw materials and food from agriculture, we will destroy what's there. And so we've got, I think, two issues. One is, you talked about bringing the blue through the green, but there is a tendency to look for win-wins that will bring the economy, the economic exploitation of the seas to make it worth protecting them. And also, again, I'm coming back to this concern about food security. With the war in Ukraine, which is blocking food exports to large parts of the world, suddenly it's become really urgent. And the seas, we're now looking at that again as a resource for food rather than necessarily as something to protect it. So in your work in the Parliament on an everyday basis, how easy is it for you to get the message through that it isn't just look at the blue oceans as a resource for food, in terms of how do we harvest it more, how do we take more out of it, but to create that balance?
It's actually very challenging to be a member of the PESH committee, the Fisheries Committee, because we see the different interest groups within the Parliament. Remember, we're public representatives, we're elected by the people, and then there's the very heavy lobby interests as well. And it's very frustrating to see, initiatives coming from the European Commission that are good, ambitious, and then within the Parliament, and particularly in a committee like PESH, which is fairly conservative, that the voices for the healthy oceans, for the protection of the oceans and that food resource, it is very often, it's very hard to be heard. Because there are definitely big interests. And that is extremely challenging for us. And then sometimes and if you take something like the control file, the control regulation, I mean, that's, it's progressing very, very slowly. But also, again, where I feel, coming from an NGO background and as an ecologist, a trained ecologist, I feel that the vested interests from a few are often trumping what we're trying to get through with the support of NGOs. So that is complex. There's no doubt about it. But in the end, and Barbara referred to it, like the maritime spatial planning law and the whole area around the marine is changing, and there's more, there's more interest in the area of offshore renewable energy, so clean energy in that, and all of this will have to be managed very carefully with the different stakeholders. But the most important is to go back to the common good. So if we take the approach that everything we do around the oceans has to be with that common good approach, that will help. The other area we're working on in the Parliament at the moment is the area of ocean governance, and make sure that that we recognize the potential of the oceans, but that there's governance mechanisms in place, because very often we haven't. Certainly with the oceans, we haven't taken an ecosystem approach. So we're still, it's still piecemeal. Again, the oceans aren't being threaded into all the different policy areas. And then when we look to the oceans, and there's a speed on at the moment. In my own country, for instance, in Ireland, we've just got the legislation across for the marine planning in the areas around Ireland in terms of offshore renewable. So there's a big interest in that, in companies coming in. So if we don't create the mechanisms where we can sit around and try to, going back to the common good, find a way of dealing with the opportunities that we have, but in a fair and balanced way, then I'm afraid we will have those tensions that Barbara referred to, and it won't be just the fishers, but it'll also be, it'll be challenging for coastal communities. Tourism is a big area now, not only not just food, but there's so many other aspects that are important. So I suppose as a member of the European Parliament, you're looking at all of the different interest areas, looking at, obviously taking on board the evidence, the climate change, biodiversity decline, and looking at, okay, the vision, how are we going to go forward, bringing as many together as possible. And then for me personally, I'm inspired by nature. That's why I, get up at 6 in the morning to come over here to Brussels and, work ridiculous hours because, I love the planet we live on. I know the ocean. I've been all over the seas, and there's so much. It's worth it, and that's why again the Blue Manifesto. This helps us. It really, really helps us to forge out that pathway, and then to feel that we're all in it together, and there's really something worth protecting, and that's important to keep going.
Thank you, and I'm sure that thank you for endorsing the Blue Manifesto. And again, a call out to those of you who are here and watching us online. We're encouraging people to go to the website, to endorse it, to download it, and use it to hold their policymakers accountable, because it sets out every year 10 practical, concrete things that we have to do in order to deliver a restored ocean by 2030. Let me bring in Jessica now, because you're here as the voice of civil society, and you're an activist working on ocean issues. We heard about some of the different issues, the impact on fishing communities. What would the EU fisheries policies look like if we approached it as a global justice and sustainability issue? Because we know there's quite negative impacts of EU fishing policy in other parts of the world. So if we looked at fisheries through that lens of global social justice, what would it look like?
Thank you very much, and I think that's a really good question to ask. I would also like to thank the organizers, the NGOs, for inviting me and for recognizing the need for a young voice also to be on the panel. Youth care a lot about these topics, also because we recognize that we need a lot of climate action, and our action or inaction will impact us the most and the longest. And I think I'm part of the Euro-Oceans Youth Network, a youth network of over 100 activists. And for many of us, the reason to join is to incorporate the ocean more into the climate action, because we can see the integral needs. And we want to, of course, be able to restore that. And you asked me about a climate justice lens to this issue. And I think climate action and climate change is essentially, it is justice. We see already that the impact on African countries, for example, is so much bigger. 10 of the most climate vulnerable countries are on the African continent, but the whole continent has only contributed about 4% of greenhouse gas emissions. And the same is true for coastal areas and for small island states. So we see that people living there are much more dependent on the ocean. The economy is dependent on the ocean. Of course, a larger part of people are living around the ocean, so the impact will be much bigger, but at the same time, they've had the least to do with creating this problem. And I think that when we do think about this, large and big issue, it's very important to recognize that it's not all or nothing. It's not all in, or we have the apocalypse, and we might as well not try. There's a lot of gray area here, and within that gray area, we are talking about people and people's lives, right? And people's livelihoods. So every step that we do take will mean more lives saved and better life for everyone. And so in that sense, we have worked on a set of 11 recommendations with the youth group. And one of them ties directly to what we mentioned within the Blue Manifesto, which is the EU fishing policies. We do recognize that the EU has that set up, a common fisheries policy, and there is a system in place, but it's not working out, it's not enough, and we're not following through. So our first recommendation within our set is to set up a surveillance program, a separate body that would measure this and that would take the data and that would make sure that we actually follow up on it, and that when we have the 2023 assessment, we can see some more yellow and hopefully a lot of green there as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And let me ask you, you're part of 100 youth activists who are campaigning around this. What can citizens, individuals, small organizations, what can we do to make sure that we can have much better impact on issues like that? What can we do to help the EU move in the direction it needs to be? We heard from Hans that it's a pivotal decade, that the evidence is there, and it's actually been there for a while, and we haven't done much on it. How do individuals get involved?
Another good question. So yes, I'm part of the Eurooceans network. We are over 100 young people from all over Europe, exactly. And we have been working for a couple of months on these recommendations. We've done workshops, we've been to webinars, we've been researching, we've been debating a lot. We've had a lot of late night sessions writing our recommendations. We've come up with a set of 11 of now, and a lot of them ask the EU to invest in capacity building of people. So to get a larger knowledge, and this concept of knowing about the ocean is called ocean literacy. So to know the basics, just to know the impact the ocean has within our atmosphere and within our lives, and the impact you have on it. And we want an ocean literacy platform where we can combine most of this information and people have a central point to go to. And within this, there's another recommendation for EU policy and project managers to get certification, to get this ocean literacy and to know the impact, because we know the EU certifies a lot of projects and that's really good. But this is a big impact that we can make then if people that are signing off on those plans are aware of the impacts that they are having. And the hope is, of course, that with more knowledge, we will spur into action faster, right? We've heard this before. We've been talking about this for a long time, and we need to follow through and have that implementation. And one way we would like to do that, especially for young people, is to have a Blue Erasmus program. So Erasmus program, exchanges, internships, and more networking opportunities for young people to get into this sector and to be, of course, very climate positive within the sector, but to upskill the next generation of people that need to work these jobs and that need to make these changes so that we are ready to tackle them. And I think the EU has a really large role to play in the implementation, also in the legislation. We know all this already, right? We can follow through on these recommendations on the Blue Manifesto. So that is also an ask we have to please look at that. And for inspiration, look at our 11 recommendations. Yes.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm now going to invite you, the audience, to be part of our conversation. We know we've already started to get some questions in from Twitter and the live stream chat, but I don't know if we can raise the lights here so I can start to see. Is there anyone here who would like to ask a question? Because I have people with mics who are able to come in. Do we already have somebody? Yes, please go ahead. We'll take your question.
Yes, good evening. My name is Flaminia Tacconi. I work for Climate Earth. Okay.
Go ahead.
So my name is Flaminia Tacconi. I work for Climate Earth. I had a question for Hans, but I think Grace is also very much aware of the problem of harmful subsidies, because it's great to have the policy, the intention, but if the money flows into the wrong direction, it's all for nothing. And I know I was actually quite sad that the Director General of DG Environment didn't speak about the commitment to eliminate environmental harmful subsidies at least by 2025, but I think it should be earlier. And I wanted to ask Hans whether, in your vision, you also tackle the problem of environmental harmful subsidies, which are particularly problematic in fisheries.
Thank you. So Hans, here's a tough one. You developed these scenarios, these imaginaries for 2030. Did you assume business as usual, or did you assume we could readjust the common fisheries policy so it was less harmful?
Well, let's put it, there is no more business as usual. It's all business as unusual on this planet from now on. I mean, that needs to be the starting position. And of course, we speak about environmentally harmful subsidies. We've been speaking about it for 30 years. You know, if you look at the OECD, you look at the European Union, we've mentioned this to countries time and time and time again. You need to stop with environmentally harmful subsidies because they stand in the way of what you're trying to implement or not trying to implement, for that matter. I mention it time and time and time again when I speak. I think we pay too much attention. No, we pay enough attention to what we should improve, change, innovate, and then, scale up and speed up in terms of good practices. it's time that we spend a lot more attention about what we should stop doing. And what we should stop doing is, amongst other things, environmentally harmful subsidies, environmentally harmful spatial planning, unhelpful tax systems, all of that. Because if we don't do that, good luck with your speeding up and scaling up the solutions. It's not that we don't see pickup of renewables, for example, it's that the fossil fuels don't go down. Yeah? And the same is true with good practices in fishing. There's a lot of innovation there. There's a lot of people that are willing to do it. But as long as we've got these, excuse my French, but monster boats that arrive from wherever to pretty much, floating fabrics on the sea that practice what we should be stopping, it's not going to work very well. And environmentally harmful subsidies are one of these things. And it's not that we don't know about it. We've been talking about it for many, many years. It's about time that we put our money where our mouth is and really shift the European model that has a tradition of investing significant public funds in the economy. We don't need to change to a model where it's all the private sector. But if we cannot, in this decade, by 2030, shift all that money in a sustainable direction, I think we are squandering the opportunity of a lifetime, and we are squandering the opportunity to actually strongly implement the best policy hope we've ever had in Europe, and it's called the European Green Deal.
Grace, I saw you nodding a lot when Hans was speaking. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, so I was the rapporteur on the 8th Environment Action Programme over the last year and a half. And environmentally harmful subsidies was one of the key issues in that. I just want to remember and remind people, first and foremost, we need a deadline to stop fossil fuel subsidies. So we need that, and we need it as soon as possible. In terms of environmentally harmful subsidies, I bet everyone in the room would feel like, oh, I can tell you what that is, But one thing we need is some kind of a classification system. What are we talking about here in terms of environmentally harmful subsidies? And, there's money from taxpayers' money, your money, flowing into mechanisms that are actually continuing to accelerate climate change and biodiversity decline. And these are these environmentally harmful subsidies. So we have to put an absolute brake on your money going to kill the planet, or your money going to damage the oceans. So that in the Environment Action Programme to 2030, there is a commitment to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. What we need is a deadline, so we need you to put pressure on the European Commission to come up with the deadline. We need it to be ASAP, so it's got to be 22, 23 or 24 latest. And then in terms of environmentally harmful subsidies, we need the European Commission to come up with a classification system as soon as possible as to what is we can name and identify as harmful subsidies. And then we have to stop money going in that direction. It seems so common sense at times. Like, why? Why are we pumping money into killing the very life-supporting system that we need to survive on planet Earth? It just doesn't make sense. So I just go back to, as Hans said, excuse his French, and he used the word monster. I don't know where monster was a French word. But no, but the monster, you're right. So you're referring to these incredibly big and very powerful lobby systems that are around us in the Parliament, in the European Union. And so we need an army of us, or a collection of us, to stop, to try to stop them, let's call them the monsters, destroying our planet. So we have to stop money flowing into subsidizing this harm. So we have a principle called do no harm principle, and we need to listen to it. and not create this harm. And the other principle I have always admired and used is the precautionary principle. If we know that there is potential for something to do damage, let's not even go there. So we need to listen to those very important principles, and we have to stop as soon as possible fossil fuel subsidies and environmentally harmful subsidies, because essentially they are literally the knife into our own hearts, and it's just not on.
Thank you. Barbara, let me invite you to come in on this, because as we heard, there's often lots of lists of things to do, and we need to speed things up, but we aren't being sufficiently scrutinous on the things that we're doing that are creating the problem, feeding the problem, and keeping coastal communities in difficulty. Can you set out what things that you'd like to see us stop doing?
Well, first I want to add something maybe on the subsidies on fossil fuel, because there's two things. One is actually really subsidizing fossil fuel. The other thing is the taxing on fossil fuel. And at this moment, a big part of our fishing fleet is not fishing. The landings have dramatically dropped. A lot of ships cannot sail out anymore because it costs more to catch fishes than the worth of the fish. Prices of fish have gone up sky high. It's crazy. And a lot of the fishermen who now are not sailing out are, of course, thinking about what am I going to do, and thinking about switching over to fixed gear fisheries and other fisheries that involve less fuel, which is good to, it should have been done before probably, but they are forced now. And I think if you at this moment would start taxing, put higher taxes on fossil fuel for the fishing fleet, it might be counterproductive. I'm always one of the people who say, let's do it now, not wait, we must do it now. We don't have time. But in this case, really, the situation is so difficult. And a lot of fishing families are on the verge of not making it. And we need investments in maybe other gear types, maybe other vessel types, that really this needs also precaution. So, I would personally not say, let's start subsidizing fishermen to keep their fuel prices lower than they are now by the market. But please, I would say, like, putting the taxes up, maybe this is not the good moment. It might do a lot more harm than some people realize just now because of the situation we are in with the war in Ukraine and everything, which of course we couldn't foresee a couple of months ago.
Thank you. Let me invite if we have another question in from the audience, because if not, I have one online that I'd like to share. Is there anyone else from the audience who'd like to speak? Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming to talk about this critically important topic. And I just wanted to focus in specifically on one aspect of the Blue Manifesto, on the sort of 30 by 30 aspiration, on the idea of protecting 30% of the world's oceans. And really just to ask your views on how we can sort of really protect these areas. I mean, there's a lot of talk about what people are calling sort of paper parks, where you have a marine protected area or something similar, but it's in sort of name only, and there's actually no real protection in that area, and all kinds of damaging fishing practices or et cetera can still take place. You may have noticed that today was the first day of a series of laws in the UK which have come in, which will ban bottom trawling in a number of marine protected areas, including a particularly large one in the North Sea and the Dogger Bank and a few other areas. And that's something that is also sort of required by the Habitats Directive in the EU, and it's something that member states that they've tried to implement many times over the years and never really with much success. It was very good to hear Patrick saying earlier that the new action plan on marine biodiversity, the idea will be to try and phase in some of these some of the restrictions on bottom trawling in marine protected areas. But how do you think we can sort of break through that inertia that we've seen in recent decades, really, in creating real marine protected areas and potentially highly marine protected areas with no-take zones? Thank you.
Thank you. I see hands. You've already grabbed the microphone. You're ready to go on this one. Paper parks, things that exist on paper but not in reality. And as we've heard from the audience, that we have form in this respect. The Habitats Directive required us to do things. It hasn't happened. We've seen that in other global commitments on deforestation, and yet we're still chopping down trees. How do we make sure that if there is a target, that it's real and it's enforceable and it has teeth? So Hans, I'll invite you to set out some of the evidence of what works, and then Grace, I'll invite you to talk politically about what would need to happen.
I think it's a great question, because it's absolutely essential that if you say you protect something, that you actually protect it. And the quality of protective measures, of management systems, as we call it, on land has been rather sketchy. We know that. And on the sea, it's been even more sketchy. Yeah. So the quality needs to improve, as Patrick Child has said, and that usually also means that the monitoring needs to be improved, the checking needs to be improved, and then you have the stick. Yeah. If actors don't stick to these commitments, we need to be able to do something about it. And that's, of course, a compliance side, which we don't do as an agency. That is Commission work, but it's absolutely essential because it's not happening. It's difficult on the sea. It's what we call a low governance zone. And if you go outside of immediate territorial waters, it becomes an almost no governance zone de facto. So it's absolutely essential. Strong governance measures that are looked at in their planning stage, in their implementation documentation, but then also checks on what is actually happening, and if actors don't stick to that, serious compliance. And if we don't do that, we will keep following the trajectory of the biodiversity loss over the last 22 years, and that is a gradual further decline of biodiversity, because in 2000 we said we'll halt biodiversity. It hasn't happened. In 2010 we said, you know what, we'll do it by 2020. It hasn't happened. It is not credible to now say we'll do it by 2030 without really going to the core of why it's not happening. And that is the systems that are at the drivers of unsustainability, and then the measures, and really making sure that they are doing what we want them to do.
Grace, Hans has said very clearly the data is there. It's not that we don't know what's happening. The data is being systematically published. We see the trends. Where's the political problem?
Well, I think the problem is the management. So there is a willingness. So in the biodiversity strategy, the 30 by 2030, 30% marine protected areas, 10% strictly marine protected areas. I suppose, in my own view, I think when I think of management, I think of people, and I think we're not investing people into the management of these marine protected areas, and this is where the jobs come in. So if, for instance, there was more of a buy-in from local authorities, regions, national member states, and then beyond to the Union, the European Union, where there's some mechanism to create more jobs around marine protected areas. So, the evidence needs to be gathered around the different zones. So who's doing that? Who's collecting the evidence? What evidence are they collecting? Could it be done better? Could there be more people employed in gathering that? Could that be the fishers themselves? Fishermen and women going out and managing these areas, monitoring these areas as part of their daily duties, and then we get, because, we all know that there's no one in, or most people in fisheries, their interest is in protecting the resource for future. So if we could show the benefits, and that goes back to Jessica's point of ocean literacy, if we could show the benefits of the marine protected areas, that so that the vision is that by protecting these areas, the result will be an increase in biodiversity. That biodiversity will create the resource that the fishers will need to bring home the fish. And then the biodiversity in turn gets the benefit of these areas. And then the strict ones even more so. I mean, it's 10% strict marine protected areas. But I think my own feeling is that we, over the last, say, 30 years or so, and 20 years ago, when we started talking about marine protected areas, the notion was good, but that's all it's been. It's been an ocean. It hasn't an ocean. No, it's been a notion, not an ocean. But it has. That's all it's been. So now we need to bring in, as Hans was saying, the governance mechanisms, and we need to bring in the management, and then we, as Jessica was saying, the ocean literacy, that everyone can see what the benefits are of the marine protected areas. The area, I think generally we think of marine protected areas in terms of building the productive resource or reproductive resource in that area. But these marine protected areas are, like if you have seagrasses in there, they're sequestering carbon, you have the different algae sequestering carbon. I mean, they provide so many, as they call it, ecosystem services. So if people don't recognize and see the value of that and measure, like there's got to be a management program, and it's you use the term paper park, and I know that's the term that would be used in Ireland. People would say, there's no genuine interest in protecting these other than on paper, and that's just not good enough. So there's nothing worse than having something on paper. It's such a disincentive. If we don't see, if people don't see the productive value of mechanisms like marine protected areas, then they will remain a paper park to our detriment. So we really do need to start to manage and make sure that they are genuinely protecting that marine area for all of the areas I just outlined.
Thank you. And we're just going to sort of talk for another 7 or 8 minutes on this panel. And let me bring up one final element, which is we focused very much so far on what happens in the oceans, the fishing, the transport, etc. But I want us to make the link to what's happening on the land, and particularly chemical pollution that we find in the sea. Hans, you've alluded to it, and other speakers, that part of the source of the degradation of the ocean is what's happening in the land, whether it's agricultural runoff of fertilizers and other chemicals, it's the byproducts of our industrial patterns. So I'd like each of you to just take a minute to say, how do we make sure that when we look at trying to protect the oceans, we make the link to what needs to happen, the policies that need to happen on the land that are so contributory to some of the damage on the sea. So I'll start with you, Hans, and we'll go all the way through. I'll finish with Jessica.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll be very short. Patrick Child has mentioned the chemical strategy, where the new principle is supposed to be, or is, safe and sustainable by design. So that will be a revolution in the chemicals sector. Then if you look at the agricultural sector, I mean, in this audience, you don't need to dwell too much on that. It's absolutely essential that we come to a sustainable food system, including land-based agriculture, use of pesticides, fertilizer, excess use of fertilizers, waste. And waste management is absolutely critical. And then there are all the forms of dispersed pollution that end up in the water. It can come from many sources. And increasingly, climate change is fundamentally changing the functioning of the ocean system. And that is really deeply concerning to scientists. So it's connected to all of these systems, and voilà. Yeah.
Barbara.
As we always say, we share the responsibility. So it's not only the responsibility of fishermen to fish sustainably, we are all together responsible for healthy waters and healthy seas. What we try to do is just make the connection with people, take them out to the sea and try to make them feel that they are co-responsible, and it's no use in pointing at each other about what he or she or those people are doing wrong. It makes more sense to look at, hey, what can you actually do? Because these problems like climate change are so big that, you know, it's very easy to feel like, you know, kind of helpless, cannot do anything. But all these huge problems consist of they are caused by a complex of small actions. So if the cause is a lot of small actions, then we don't need to only look for big solutions, but everybody can make a small change, because all the small changes, if every little piece of plastic that the wind takes out of my pocket when I try to reach for my car keys, if that contributes to the plastic, the problem in the ocean, then every piece of plastic that I pick up from the street and put in my pocket helps the other way. So it's just, I think, just making people feel less hopeless, helpless, and, you know, have more the feeling like, hey, everybody can do something, no matter how small. And all the small things that we do together will help. At the same time, we need the infrastructure, we need the legislation, we need other policies, we need a tax system that's more fair. And the taxes, the things that we want to stop or to slow down. So that's the other thing that we all together, and also all citizens together, can ask from our politicians to do something about this. And we must. So I think it's much more like getting together and knowing better like where we want to go together.
Okay. Grace.
Yeah, so I'll just go back to that ecosystems approach, and as an ecologist, like everything on the blue planet, everything is interconnected and interrelates, and that's us with nature and us humans as being a part of nature, and having said that, a very destructive part of nature at this present time. You know, it's really important in the European Union. We have policies like the Common Fisheries Policy, we have the Common Agricultural Policy, and those, all policies interact and interface, and we must recognize the whole time that cause and effect. So if we create a policy in one area, so something around the common agricultural policy, how is that going to affect on the common or impact on the common fisheries policy? And we need that joined up thinking in this time of humanity, of climate change and of climate crisis and biodiversity decline. So we need to constantly using that ecosystem's capacity in how we approach everything. And then just again to mention the Environment Action Programme to 2030. One of the commitments in that is that the European Commission will come up with a directive on soil, healthy soil, by 2023. And this is critical because we have to stop stop the overuse of nitrates, fertilizers, and all of that runoff coming through the soils into the water sources and then into the sea. So it's that joined up thinking, constantly recognizing that that policies have to interact and interrelate with each other, and then we have to stop zero pollution, stop causing harm to the planet, because again, if we pollute our soil, if we enable that through policies that are badly thought out, then again, that's impacting on us humans, the food we eat, the quality of the food we eat. So look, I suppose the vision is to move towards a clean, healthy and fair planet. And once again, in this context and in this environment tonight, I would say that should be done in a blue sense, recognizing the huge contribution that the oceans play to life on planet. We would not exist, we would not be here this evening if we didn't have the oceans doing so much for us on a momentary basis, on every minute, every hour. It's highly dynamic, and if we don't protect these ecosystems, then we're essentially on a road to nowhere.
Jessica, I'll give you the final word. If you could briefly say, how do we make that connection, make sure the policies and the decisions about policies on land are linked into supporting and protecting life in the ocean?
Yes, thank you. I read somewhere, when I read about the Blue Manifesto, that it was referred to as a rescue plan for the ocean, right? It was not some nice to-do list and let's talk about it. No, it's already a rescue plan. It was in 2020, and we've seen the assessment, and actually the next assessment went back on a couple of the assessments from the previous issue and had to say, actually, it's actually much worse. So what we see is the way we are consuming and what we are doing is killing the planet and the way we are polluting it. And I think what we can do is make it easier for people to sort of do the right thing and to make the right choices by subsidizing the right things and by putting policies in place that will make it easier for you to have a positive impact. So as long as a flight will be cheaper and easier as the train, it will not happen, right? It's not fair to people to ask that individually. And that brings me to my second point. Actual legislation should be aimed at the corporations that are perpetuating this and that are making it much worse. Yeah.
Thank you very much to the panel for sharing your hopes, your aspirations, your sadness and pessimism. But the message I think that Barbara said is small actions add up, and every single one of them is part of the change. Grace, you called for us to help support politicians to do the right thing and get things done. Hans, you said the evidence is out there, the trends are there, we just need to act, and we need to learn to stop doing things. And Jessica, you said that each of us, we have a part to play, and we need to make the environmental and sustainable things the easy and the right thing to do. So thank you all. A warm thank you to our panel.
Thank you.
Now, you may remember that our first speaker, Martin, opened the evening by talking about the wonder and the magic that we as human beings feel when we experience the ocean. And what we wanted to do for you tonight was to give you an opportunity to re-experience that. So we're now going to have an immersive experience to engage with the sounds and the vision and the sights of the sea. I'm welcoming Antoine de Schutter. Enjoy. Thank you so much to Antoine de Schulte for bringing the magic back to our evening and giving us an opportunity to immerse in the full experience of sound and vision of different aspects of the ocean. I'd like to now focus our minds on what the EU Ocean Week is all about, and I'm delighted that we can show you a video from Alexandra Cousteau, who's the co-founder of Oceana and a lifelong activist for the sea, something that's in the DNA of her family. So let's watch her message to us tonight.
Hello, and thank you for attending this Ocean Week high-level event. I am Alexandra Cousteau, Senior Advisor to Oceana and co-founder of Oceans 2050. Europe has a special role on the global stage, but this comes with responsibilities. The EU profiles itself as a leader in marine protection, announces impressive commitments, for example, on marine protected area coverage, and tries to persuade other countries to follow suit. But these leadership efforts are undermined by the EU's lack of ability to effectively protect its own seas. This creates a problem of credibility and a sense that ambitious rhetoric is not matched by actual actions. The Blue Manifesto assessment clearly shows that more needs to be done, and much faster. In light of the climate and biodiversity crises, there is no more time to lose with empty promises. The EU has had policies and laws in place for literally decades that require the protection of the marine environment. It is high time to put those requirements in practice. A welcome development in this regard is the EU's ambitious commitment to protecting 30% of its waters by 2030, with 10% strictly protected. But right now, most EU marine protected areas are little more than paper parks. They are so-called protected on paper, but harmful activities such as bottom fishing, dredging, oil and gas extraction, and more still happen within them. By 2030, the EU must make sure that those 30% are actual protected areas, where human activities are minimal, and only those that are compatible with a healthy sea are allowed. And at the very least, 10% must be fully protected, meaning no take, no go zones. Despite a six-fold increase in the Natura 2000 surface at sea in the last 20 years, recent data shows that most threatened marine habitats and species in the EU remain in poor conservation status. Later this month, the European Commission will publish a proposal for which it has committed to put forward legally binding EU nature restoration targets to restore biodiversity and degraded ecosystems, in particular those with the most potential to capture and store carbon, like seagrass meadows. It is important to keep in mind that the largest carbon store on the entire planet is the seabed, and that therefore protecting and restoring marine habitats is essential in the fight against climate change. The Commission's proposal must be ambitious enough to offer the much-needed nature-based solutions to both help reverse biodiversity loss and contribute to climate change mitigation. But restoration will only work if we tackle the activities that are destroying our precious marine life. Right now, the EU is spending millions of euros every year to subsidize fossil fuels and harmful fishing activities. As we speak, the World Trade Organization is finalizing its agreement on fisheries subsidies, and it is essential that the EU takes the lead in redirecting these valuable financial resources to support European fishers to transition to truly low-impact fishing. Similarly, restoration will not work if we keep treating the ocean as a waste bin. More than 90% of all the plastic that ends up in the ocean lies on the seabed, far from our sight, but poisoning and harming marine life for decades or even centuries to come. Europe has taken first steps to ban some single-use plastics, but what we really need is an entire system change and to embrace reuse and refill solutions instead. The EU is among the richest, most developed regions in the world. It must show that it is possible to maintain a high level of prosperity while protecting the marine environment, which we imperil at our own risk. Indeed, that prosperity requires a healthy marine environment. So thank you all for joining us today and adding your voice to the call for restoring our ocean to health and abundance.
So we had a reminder there of just how important it is for us to protect our oceans for the climate and for the well-being of the planet itself. And now, on behalf of the 6 organizing NGOs for the EU Ocean Week, I'm delighted to introduce Tobias Troll, who is the Marine Policy Director for Seas at Risk. Tobias.
Thank you. So, I guess I'm the last man standing between you and the cocktail. So I won't be long. And I'm actually standing here a bit by surprise because Monika Verbeek, the director of Seas at Risk, was supposed to stand here now, but unfortunately she's in quarantine with COVID. So I'm doing my best to make this short and still share some thoughts and observations from this very interesting and insightful and inspiring evening, at least for me. I'm born in a meteor crater in Bavaria many years ago. So that was that happened through a meteorite impact from outer space 15 million years ago. That was a big disaster, obviously, as you can imagine at the time. Luckily, no humans were around. But Bavaria today is fully restored, as you might know, and a nice place to live for Bavarians or people who like it there. And I'm telling you this because since I joined the crowd of the ocean defenders not so long time ago, I often heard things like the ocean is suffering, the ocean is in pain, the ocean has no time, Adam said earlier this evening. And I think that's a very anthropocentric view, because the ocean has actually a lot of time. As Barbara also said, the ocean is changing, the ocean is adapting. For the ocean, we are just a blink of the eye in the 4 billion years of history of this planet, when water has always been around. But what is suffering is life in the ocean and humans as well. I mean, we have these immense pressures on ocean species which get extinct. But also, as we heard also tonight from Barbara in particular, I mean, and we all know that life for people living at and from the ocean is also not great. Of course, islands are sinking in the ocean with climate change, I mean, there are less and less fishers, traditional coastal, small-scale, low-impact fisheries are disappearing. And the worst thing is that we as humans are actually responsible for the situation, for species extinction, for pollution, overfishing, climate change. We heard a lot about all these things tonight. So we also heard a lot about system change, a just transition, respecting planetary boundaries and all these things. But unfortunately, as it seems, there is still a lot of spin and strength with this old narrative of unlimited growth and profits maximization for a few. I want to show you something which comes from a brilliant report from BirdLife on marine spatial planning. So you cannot see that in detail, obviously, but what you might be able to see, this is the German North Sea, the marine spatial plan of the German North Sea. So there are a lot of colors and different layers, just like stapling up on each other. And these are all the different uses of the North Sea. So that goes from shipping to offshore renewables, fisheries, aquaculture. The green stuff is marine protected areas, but a lot of other things are also happening there. So that is just an illustration to show that, I mean, that is not a pathway to sustainability or to a healthy ocean. I think it's pretty clear. And this dates from last year. And we have the Greens in the government in Germany. So as long as these patterns are still prevailing, I guess it will be very difficult to come to a more serene and more sane relation with the ocean. But actually, if we want to reduce these pressures, we really need to question the political economy which is behind it and move to a system which is based on serenity, on sufficiency, which respects the planetary boundaries, and which provides for a good life and the well-being for people and planet. So we don't exterminate the last harbor purposes and don't wreck the deep sea ecosystem through deep sea mining, as it's about to happen soon if we don't stand up against it now. We need to move from policy, and we are all policy experts, and the Blue Manifesto, I think, is a great compendium of all the marine policies which are around. But if we only look at these different sectorial policies, we won't change the systemic root causes behind it. So we have to move from policy to politics and to a political economy which is based on well-being instead of profits and extraction. The ocean can be our ally in this endeavor, and I think the ocean has been for millennia. The ocean is our mother, actually. The ocean gave life to all, which gave birth to all life on this planet. So we better take care of our mother and don't mess with her, because otherwise she will mess with us. Thank you, and now enjoy the cocktail.
Thank you, Tobias, with that very strong message. And as a mother, I can tell you, don't mess with mothers. They will get to you in the end. It just leaves me to say a warm thank you for those here in the audience and those online for joining us. Tonight is the flagship event as part of the EU Ocean Week, which is 7 days of events, activities, debates designed to inspire, to inform, and to empower, because the series of small actions together will bring change. So thank you for joining us. We hope you really enjoyed that immersive experience, and we want you to be able to continue that. So we have a gift for you. There is a Spotify playlist created by Client Earth, which is a playlist for the ocean. And we invite you, as you go home tonight, to listen to it and to share it. And we hope it will reconnect you to that sense of feeling that you had tonight, of the magic of the ocean and the urgency for change. We hope that this was a moment that you shared with us and that you found inspiring and interesting. But share your experience. Give us some feedback. You shall find a QR code for a survey to tell us more about what you experienced tonight, what you liked, and what we should do better. And of course, we want you to do something. We want you to help us pass the message about the Blue Manifesto and to endorse it. The 6 NGOs brought you EU Ocean Week, and they'll bring it again next year, and we hope we'll have an opportunity to share with you many more green messages rather than red and yellow where there's been no action. We rely on you to be part of that process. Tonight's event would not have been possible without a number of different people, so some special thanks, and you'll see all the names on the screen, to people who made it possible for us to be here tonight, and so a warm thank you to us all. I'm now going to say thank you, and to close this live broadcast, we hope you enjoyed your time together, and to the hundreds of people around the world who watched us and spent time with us this evening, thank you, and keep taking the action. For those of you here, we invite you to participate in a cocktail, so if I could get you to make your way to the back of the room where you'll be shown upstairs, and we have a cocktail waiting for you. Can I have the directors of the 6 partner NGOs to come here, and we will take a family photo to say thank you for all your hard work. But first of all, thank you for participating, and enjoy the cocktail.